In 1798, Bridget Connors was born, though you may know her as Biddy Early, the most famous witch in all of Ireland. Follow this wise woman of County Clare as she shares the history, struggles, and triumphs of witches in The Illustrated Witchcraft, a graphic history from Lindsay Squire, available wherever you buy books. Moonbeaming listeners save 40% off this fall at quarto.com/campaign/witchcraft. We'll put the link in the show notes. Welcome to the Moonbeaming podcast. I'm Sarah Faith Gottesdiener, an artist, author, and intuitive. And together we'll explore life through a creative and spiritual lens. You'll learn so much about mysticism, creativity, consciousness, depth psychology, business, and more. And you'll get to listen to conversations with luminaries that you won't hear anywhere else. With each episode, you'll receive insights, frameworks, inspiration, and tools to help you thrive and grow. Hello, I am thrilled to be here with you. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. If you are new here, Moonbeaming, this podcast, is where myself, Sarah Faith Gottesdiener, and sometimes some incredible guests dive into intuition, creativity, magic, and more. I've owned a biz since 2012. I've written about 10 books, and I currently reside in weird and hot Los Angeles with my weird and hot partner of 13 years and my adorable rescue dogs. I have a pug and a pit bull who sometimes I will contemplate vaguely trying to make TikTok stars out of them because they are about 20 times more entertaining and interesting than myself, but I don't want to expose them to all the applause, you know. It would pale in comparison to the applause they get at home. Many Moons is a spiritual guide that my studio, the Moon Studio, puts out every year, and it is available for pre-order. I'm going to be sharing more about that soon enough. What I can tell you is that you're going to want to get it. It's like an actionable, tangible version of this podcast. The link to that is in the show notes. Before I move on to today's episode, I want to apologize in advance if you hear crickets or funny woodland-like noises. I try very hard to record in the daytime when crickets and woodland noises in my little home office are not loud. But I kept waiting. To not be stuffed up, like stuffy, like stuffed nose, because I care about your ears and I want you to have the most enjoyable listening experience possible. Well, turns out this cold just would not go away. And in true whatever fashion, I waited kind of to the last minute. And so because of that, you might hear crickets or noises, but I just think it brings a ASMR kind of white noise vibe to whatever you're listening to. So I'm just letting you know it's no fault of the editor. It is no fault of this production team. It is me, myself, and I. It's me. It's me, in the words of you-know-who. Okay. I am excited about this episode today. I want to start off by sharing a personal update that I think would be useful to folks. But then we're going to shift to a tarot episode where I'm going to do a fractal deep dive into the star, the tarot card, because this month in October, I'm teaching a tarot workshop in the Patreon that supports this podcast, the Moon Studios Patreon. So let's dive in. We'll start first with a little personal share that does dovetail, I promise you, into larger topics and issues in spirituality that might be food for thought for you as well. So I wanted to share a little bit about some revelations that have come to me through my illness. I'm speaking specifically about long COVID, which I contracted about 2 years ago, which then led to burnout. Ugh, yes, it happened. And those things combined led me almost to the brink of thinking I wasn't going to be able to work, or I was maybe only going to be able to work in like very, very tiny capacity. I really feel called to talk about this publicly because I want to be open about it, because I think this is impacting millions of people who probably have shame around it. And I want to uncouple it from ableism, honestly. I think we place a lot of judgments on people when they're going through something. I think we place a lot of judgments on people who are sick, at least in American culture, right? Where health and wellness and extreme feats of athleticism are very much extolled. There's this spiritual teaching, there's a spiritual idea that if you're, in it, if you are playing the spiritual game, so to speak, abiding by certain tenets of spirituality, that you can take anything in front of you and you can alchemize it. You can turn this hardship into some kind of gold in some form. I don't know who needs to hear this, but I do think, even as humans, in part, for some of us at least, it's what we're here to do, to turn shadows into light, to take the horrors that persist and not like Pollyanna them or turn them into the best thing that ever happened to us, but to spin them, to alchemize them, to compost them, to turn them into some kind of gift. I think of that Mary Oliver poem. Like there's basically a Mary Oliver poem for everything. Have you noticed that? And I'm paraphrasing here, where she says, someone gave me a box of darkness. In time, I realized it was a gift. You can look it up. It's obviously much better rendition on the page by her than me paraphrasing, but that's what comes to mind. And so I realized that what this illness did, what this burnout did, it did a lot. It shook my confidence a lot. It brought me to places I had never been. Again, I suppose. Hello, darkness, my old friend. But I realized that people, like certain people, think of me as a teacher. And I realized I had internalized what ideas of like being a teacher or someone who was worth sharing or taking up space. I had really, in my process of unraveling and my process of healing and recovery and my process really of becoming more human, which is really what I think spirituality is as well. It's like, how can we be more of ourselves, which ultimately is human? I had really been giving myself a lot of guff, a lot of shame about being sick and about not being able to like bounce back or not being able to have like the cure, because that's the other thing. A lot of people find a cure. Like I think in our culture, we're like, do this thing. I did this thing. It changed my life. And usually those people are really excited about it. And it's often in conjunction with some kind of teaching. And I say this as someone who literally teaches and makes a living from teaching people things that have saved my life. But in my world, in my personal life, it isn't one thing that saved my life. Just like we're all interconnected and we're in a greater web, you can't just rely on like one person to give you everything you need. Like in a, romantic partnership, like we're led to believe that in like heterosexual patriarchy. And there's a reason for that, right? There are definite like political reasons for that. moving right along, boom, 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 boom. But I had internalized the ableism that pervades a lot of the spiritual world in very unwell ways. There's this idea in a lot of New Age spirituality, but in other forms as well, like in very old spiritual traditions, that if you're sick, it's your fault. It's linked to something inside of you. You somehow caused it. And if you cannot cure it quickly, there's something inherently wrong with you, or there's something going on mentally with you, or you have bad energy or something like that. That's not my understanding of it at all. And I don't have to tell you that much of the Western medical model doesn't exactly mimic this idea. But again, in America, which is where I live, the country I live in, which happens to have a less than satisfactory healthcare system, it's even worse if you have a mysterious disease that they cannot cure quickly and cheaply within, a certain time frame or with a certain affordable medication. It's subtly mirrored or subtly imparted to you that if you don't fall within a certain window of like easy curability, I don't know if that's a word, but we'll just go with it, or like a simple diagnosis, in the words of my fave, Chapel Roan, good luck, babe. Good luck. And certainly if you're not rich, if you cannot afford PPO, which I cannot afford, you're really limited to what you can do. Like I've shared this, I think, in the Patreon, but I'll share it here. I'm currently in thousands of dollars of debt for this treatment, both Western treatment, like labs and things, and also alternative treatments I've done and tried to recover from the symptoms of long COVID. And I'm sharing this because I am no longer ashamed, and I'm sharing this because so many people are impacted by this. If it's not you who's impacted by this, it might be your roommate. It might be your best friend. It might be your partner. It might be your child. It's happening to millions of people all around the globe, and it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. You didn't cause this. It's not because you're not thinking positively enough. It's just not. Earlier this summer, I shared another personal episode about the star entering in. You can go back and listen to it if you haven't already. I think it was July, I think. I got feedback from it. A lot of people were really, really grateful. A couple people did not care to hear about my personal life. Well, it is my podcast, friend. So here we are. I don't really care anymore. That's the other thing I want to say about this illness. I've done like a lot of inner child healing around it. It's helped me, it has helped me heal other things. And I'm always here to help. I'm always here to be of service. But I'm saying this for folks, whether you have a podcast or not, whether it's the people in your household who are listening to you, or hundreds, or people at work, or, two other people, or thousands of other people. If you're in integrity and you are acting earnestly and from the heart, you really can't allow yourself to get swayed either way with extreme feedback. Extreme. You can't really believe anything too extreme because we're all just mirrors for one another. So like anything very, 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 very like, you're amazing, you're the best thing ever. I try to take that with a grain. Again, I'm super grateful. I'm so grateful to you for being here. And more than that, I'm grateful that I could be of service. Like that's the main thing. It's like, if I helped you, that's you, babe. That's you. You helped yourself, right? Maybe I said something that helped like put some pieces together for you. Maybe I offered you a tool or a framework, but you took it and you ran with it. And that's all you, right? But that is also why we heal in relationship. But I'm just saying, we can't believe anything too extreme, like to the best amazing thing or to the very, very worst thing that someone says to you. That's the trick, to stay in the middle path, None of us are like, all amazing or all like not amazing. It's in the middle. And be mindful that often what people share, often, not always, is a reflection of them. It's a mirror of them. So try that on for a week. Notice what people talk about, notice what they say, notice what they love, notice when they're critical. It's a mirror. It's saying more about them than anything. If you do that for yourself for a week, if you like notice what you're complaining about or you notice what you're gushing about, it'll give you feedback through the predominant lenses through which you most operate. And it'll give you more information like what you love. Like, why do you love it? Why do you love Chapel Rowan? Why do you love a certain TV show? Like, what is it? That's something in you. It's a mirror for something in you. This other point that I touched upon in this last episode, the last time I touched upon the star, I realized I had internalized this shame and I had just been waiting to be recovered to like maybe let myself feel worthy again or something, like worthy of being someone to learn from. And I realized I had internalized this super capitalist trope on overcoming and the, before and after and all of that stuff. But then I realized that a ton of teachers I look up to had also been very, very sick. I think of Ram Dass. I think of Tara Brach. They had dealt with serious illnesses and strokes. And I realized that personally at this point in my life, having experienced everything I've experienced and, other things I haven't brought into this conversation and I won't probably ever bring it up. That's my therapist's job. I can't afford to take advice from people who have not dealt with similar kinds of things, actually. I want to hear from people who have dealt with like some serious trials, serious challenges, and they've come out the other side with grace, with compassion, with wisdom, and not only survived, but thrived. Not only survived, but thrived. However that looks, and I'm not saying that, again, we want to be really mindful. I'm not saying that in an ableist way, like they're running marathons now. I'm just saying they came out with a greater sense of compassion, with more grace. I have this mentor. He almost died. He got a very, very, very rare and serious illness that almost completely took him out. He essentially had to learn how to think again, talk again, walk again. There's more that I won't get into. It's his story. I don't want to, tell someone's story that's not here. But he's one of the wisest people I know. And one of the turning points, honestly, in our mentorship is when he shared that. He didn't share it with me at first, but he shared what he went through. And that opened up a level of resonance, knowing, and trust with him because he has been there, And so I know for me, that's the other thing. I'm like, oh, okay, right. This is who I want in my life. This is who I want to grow from and I want to learn from. And I've been thinking a lot about some of the things we're taught to want in like Western spirituality. Like, again, I'm talking more about like New Age stuff and it seeps in everywhere. And there's this, often, not always, but often, really what we're talking about or what we're being shown that should be desirable really is synonymous to a certain extent with extreme privilege, like extreme amounts of privilege and extreme amounts of ease. And I just don't think most of our lives are like that. I wish you abundance. I wish you ease. I wish you peace. I wish you pleasure. All of it. I want that all for you. But having a challenging life doesn't mean our lives are worth less than an unchallenging life. Just because life might be harder for some of us does not mean it is not worth living with all that we can, as much as we can, and loving ourselves through it. So I wanted to share this honestly because I haven't actually heard anyone really talking about this, And I like sharing, like that's part of my role. It's part of my job is to share things that you might have thought or you might have had a conversation with someone about in private, but you haven't heard someone else really speak to it. And it freed up so much. It opened up so much more space for me to be a human. I also want to be really clear, like, I don't want you to think I'm like criticizing anyone who has extreme privilege and has extreme ease. I think it's super beautiful. I'm just saying I realized that I resonate more with folks who have a specific amount of challenge or a similar amount, I should say, because I want to take advice from people who've been through similar kinds of things as I have been through. Maybe they went through a dark night of the soul 17 times. Maybe they dealt with impossible situations and came out with such love and such kindness. I think about that quote from, again, it's like paraphrase city over here, this episode. I think about, there's a quote from Eckhart Tolle, something like, acceptance of the unacceptable is the greatest source of grace in this world. Which brings me to my next point, I just want to name this, that so many people are going through it right now. It's so challenging. I think just naming that, I'm recording this at the end of September. There was just a hurricane that decimated the Southeast. We're into a year-long genocide. I can't even touch upon all the other wars that are happening. We're dealing with major issues around the climate crisis, political issues, and on and on. And we have to at least be able to name this, that we're all connected and all of it is connected. And again, if you're listening to this and you're not suffering, bless you. Please bless you. Please enjoy it. Please love it up. I'm like so happy for you. And if you are suffering for any reason at all, I am so sorry. I am so, so sorry. And I'm sending you grace and compassion as you move through whatever it is you're moving through. And if there's anything I've taken from this period of time for myself, is to give yourself grace and give yourself love and give yourself compassion as you move through the unacceptable. Can the gold be that you are shaming yourself a little bit less? Can the gold be that you are being softer on yourself and kinder on your body a little bit more? And can you truly take into your bones that it's probably not your fault? I know that was long, but I also know that someone listening needs to hear it. So I feel okay about it. Feels like such a contrast to say that I'm good, I'm okay, I'm grateful. It's true, because life is it's complicated, right? I'm so grateful. I'm so okay. I really am. I am experiencing joy, and I'm looking forward to experiencing more joy more and more, because wow, do we all need it. We need that. And in order to really allow it to move through our body, we need one of the main qualities of the archetype I'm going to explore today. And that main quality is faith for the archetype that is the star. So let's dive in, shall we? We're diving into the star through a very specific lens. And this came about as I started exploring the topic for the October workshop, which is constellations, tarot constellations. Some of you know it's one of my side interests in tarot. It's definitely like a 200 level or 300 level, but I do think we can take these side perspectives, and it can enrich our tarot knowledge and our tarot practice. So to back up, the way that I practice, the star is a teacher card of strength. And to back up even further, again, in case you didn't know, we're in a strength year. We're in an 8 year from a numerology perspective. So we're talking about the constellation of 8. The workshop is going to be October 20th. You've got plenty of time to join the Patreon and experience that if you're listening to this at the time it airs. There are some really clear correlations between strength and the star. So many similarities once we put our focus hats on and think about it. A couple of the main ones is this connection between faith and courage. What propels us to be brave, to take risks? Faith, hope, wanting something to work out, understanding the sun will rise again. I think of the work of Marian Kaba, who says, and again, we're paraphrasing here. This is paraphrase. I didn't prepare any notes. I didn't Google anything. So we're flying. We're flying by the seat of the pants. Marian Kaba, who says, and I think it's her, I could be wrong and I could be paraphrasing, but the idea is still strong and I did not come up with it. And that is why I'm trying to cite people outside of myself. This idea that hope is a discipline, it's this commitment and it's this practice to continue to have hope, and you can substitute it for joy or optimism or love or trust, inject whatever you need right now, because it can be a challenge to not fully cave into complacency or negativity or disappointment and let it be the place from which you live and operate. But we're not doing that. Sure, yes. Feel your feelings. Turn away from hope from a while you focus on grief and recovery. While there are so many reasons why we decide to recover or to move forward again, there's so many reasons, right? A major motivator is hope and faith. It's the feeling in our bones that things have got to get better, that things are going to change. And hopefully they will change for the better. I think of our ancestors. Some of them were fleeing, like my ancestors. I'm also thinking of old thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, human ancestry itself, who migrated across continents. Yes, some scientists say it was like dopamine. Maybe again, it was fleeing. It's a mix. But we know that what they needed to have alongside bravery and courage was hope and faith, which again connects the star to the strength card. And what did they follow? What did they go by? A lot of these explorers, the stars in the night sky. I think of Harriet Tubman following the drinking gourd. I think of even the Three Kings, seeing that star, that omen, and following that star to find baby Jesus, or so the myth goes. We have oriented around the night sky for eons? ? I'm not going to fact check that, but someone else can fact check that for me. We have created myths and meaning since forever, since before we had written language. That's one of the concepts that Viktor Frankl came up with, which is that as humans, individually and collectively, we're here to make meaning. We're not here to wait for it to happen. We're not here for someone else to tell us what something means. We're here to create it as creators. We constellate around what is most resonant, meaning-wise, story-wise, myth-wise for us. And that is one of the ways that the star can be the teacher card of strength. The star marks a major breakthrough in the story of the Fool's Journey in the tarot, if you're treating it as a journey and sequentially. We can absolutely see the tarot as nonlinear. Like each archetype is its own archetype and it's not in order and we can just play with them. 1000%. It's a beautiful way to engage with it. The way I learned and the way that it does make sense to me, and so it's the way that I teach it, is through the sequence of it, is through the order of the cards, and also in the major arcana, the different lines of the tarot, which is just one of the incredible things that Rachel Pollack contributed. There's 3 lines of the tarot, the first of which is about building. It ends at the Chariot. It's really about creating within the world, creating a world, the material world, living in the material world successfully. And that's a major accomplishment. It's no small feat. The second line is the alchemy line. I call it the alchemy line because it ends with Temperance, which is a card of alchemy. It's the dissolution line. It's the underworld line. It's unpacking everything you've learned in that first line, like for survival or to be successful, and then like taking it apart, unraveling it, figuring out what you think, like what is going on with you. Sometimes I think of also this line as being about the subconscious. And then it like coalesces. We see it in the Hanged One and then Temperance. We can also think of this as the ego death line. I think Rachel Pollack calls it that. We see that in the death card. I also see it as the non-duality line, meaning this is the place in the tarot wherein, beginning with Wheel of Fortune, but really the Strength, you can like tie that back to Strength. But with the Wheel of Fortune and then Justice, you really see it. You really see non-duality start to come into play. We understand that the good might not be good, the bad might not be bad, like that, like nothing is just one thing. Actually, that kind of thinking is very immature. And there are different forces at play, and things are more nuanced and more subtle that might go beyond what we can perceive in the moment, or maybe even past our current lifetime. This is also this line of rupture, this line of like splitting. Again, it starts with Strength. I see it in the Hermit, where there's some major kind of challenge to our perspective, perhaps trauma. We could be here all day, right? It's something that causes our core beliefs, our core identity to get stirred up and shaken. It's something that causes our view of the world to change. It's like the beginning of the awakening. And the third line, we're just going to call the awakening line. I think Rachel Pollack calls this the superconscious. I think if we're like looking at this from a Jungian perspective, which you can do, I look at it from my own perspective, which is like relational, interdisciplinary. I don't have a sexy and sweet line to sell you on my view of the tarot, but the awakening line is line 3. We see this start to happen, I think, in death. I think like death or loss is an awakening of sorts, you know? The way that it transforms us on a cellular level. And then at the Devil, we encounter the shadow. Now, the shadow is absolutely a form of awakening. It's seeing something that is very confronting to our consciousness or our ego. The Devil is where we figure out, if we're lucky, the Devil is where we figure out what is at the root of our compulsions, our addictions, what's going on in the basement, you know? Don't go in the basement, right? You're always watching the show. You're like, why are they going in the basement? Well, we got to go in the basement. It's where we find out where we are being, like what we are being controlled by, essentially. We're finally, it's clear or more clear what invisible cages we've put ourselves in. And for that, the Devil is this archetype of liberation. It's like a very sexy archetype. Let's be real. It's where kink and pleasure and subversion and queerness and play come through. It's also the potent experience of shadow work, which is, in my humble opinion, one of the most healing things you can do. And Jung would say you must integrate the shadow in order to become whole. In order to become real, you must integrate your shadow. Reclaiming those parts of yourself that you had shame around. It's also about healing toxic shame. leaning into the parts of you that are very powerful that you're afraid of. And after that is the Tower card, which continues on the like unshackling and dismantling, which eventually leads to liberation, which also is one of the harder cards in the tarot, you know? I love Karina Rosella's definition. They described it as, again, I'm paraphrasing here, the Tower as being what happens when you lose something you thought you couldn't live without. Woof. Am I right? Good luck, babe. It's this major ending of illusions. It's this major revelation. I very much see it as tied to death as well. We see this whole non-duality and healing of trauma sequence that begins in the second line and in the star begins to resolve. After this whole incredibly intense sequence of archetypes that I would say really starts really with strength, because strength is a big, 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 big challenging archetype. I mean, all of them can be big and challenging, but when you're in the second line, y'all, that is one challenging, intense archetype after another. Finally, with the star, we get some relief. Like, hallelujah, baby, right? Like, phew, not a moment too soon, right? And that's why we love the star. The star is this universally beloved card. It's one of the cards where there's not necessarily like a bad aspect. Maybe there are shadows to everything. I don't really want to get into it here though. I don't want to ruin it. I want to enjoy the star. Even the shadows of the star, while like they could be the opposite of the star's attributes, like they're not in quotes necessarily that like bad in quote, because the star's attributes are so beautiful and so healing. The way I teach, the way I think of tarot is that every archetype can mean so many different things. So the star can mean so many different things. And if we're looking at it through this particular sequence I'm talking about, this rupture and then repair, this trauma and then this healing, it's the recovery process in the star. And I started thinking of the star as a trauma healing card when I looked into some of the symbology of one of the most famous renditions of this card, which is the Pamela Coleman Smith rendition. I'm sure it can come into your mind right now of a naked blonde figure kneeling on the bank of a lake or a river. And then in the background, in the upper right, is the ibis or ibis. I don't know how we pronounce that bird. It's an Egyptian bird, though, so I looked into it. And what this bird does is it is a bird that lives on the banks of the Nile River. And when a hurricane is coming or a storm or the Nile is going to flood, as it does, it is one of the first animals to be able to know that this is going to happen. And it is one of the first animals to fly away. It is also one of the first animals to know when the storm is over and to come back to their home. And for that reason, I see this archetype, the star, as being this moment where you finally feel safe enough to come back into your body and to heal. In order to heal, we need to be in the present moment. Trauma robs us of this ability. And we need to be in our bodies. Healing trauma really happens through the body and really happens through the nervous system and happens through a sense of felt safety that only we can tell ourselves and tell our body, like we can't intellectualize sensations of safety. It has to be embodied. The star says it's safe to come back now. It's safe to heal. It's time. All those parts of ourselves, our soul, that flew away, that were hidden away, all the fractals of our spirit that got frozen due to trauma, all the parts of us, our inner child, our brilliance, our genius, our gifts, all those parts that felt like they couldn't be expressed, strength guard, or maybe weren't deserving of love, or again, all the parts of ourselves we repressed or pushed down are now safe to come out and integrate and be expressed. And so it's also for this reason that I do see the star card as fundamentally linked to soul retrieval and a card of spiritual retrieval, coming home, home to yourself, home to the present moment, and also home to the infinite, which is the present moment and all the infinite potential of the present. And when we're home in ourselves, as you can see in that nude figure, which is the symbol of vulnerability and authenticity, like nothing to hide, this figure has access to the sky, the cosmos, water, earth, the world around them. And symbolically, we can think of the water as a subconscious part. So, like, they have access to subconscious and consciousness, these different aspects of self in an integrated way. They're choosing it, right? They're holding these vessels. They've created the capacity to hold these different parts of ourselves. It's this expansion. I think about it as coming right after the tower, which was this contraction that gets expanded. What happens when we're super narrow? When our consciousness is very constricted? We go extreme. We get into rigid thinking, either or thinking. We also don't have access to our imagination. We don't have access to play and curiosity and the ability to make our own meaning from our own unique genius. Also, we can see how this is linked to strength. We don't have access to trust, or we don't have access to the positive symbology, symbols, signs, intuition that enter into our consciousness or that we notice in the world, whether it's an image that comes through in a dream, a word that is delivered to us through meditation, a reoccurring tarot card or oracle card we keep pulling. These are positive aspects of our subconscious and unconscious. And so in the star, there's this ability to look up, to become more expansive, to look down, to look all around, right? And to have access to the positive parts of the unconscious and subconscious that can help our recovery. All that depends on safety. All of that is predicated on safety, on feeling safe enough to recover, safe enough to relax, safe enough to heal. You cannot heal the wound in the environment it was created in. You can make progress for sure. You can do a lot, but it's really hard to clean up certain dynamics and patterns if you're faced every day with those dynamics. There does come a time where you must pause and take a step back, find a different job, or, go low contact or no contact with certain people. And that's also sometimes what the star speaks to. It's like, okay, it's healing time. What are we doing? What do we need? What do we need to implement? Again, it's not forever, but for long enough to heal and recover, long enough to attend to your nervous system, long enough to rewire your neural pathways and to get to the place where you're not reacting. Another Viktor Frankl quote, paraphrasing, is between a stimulus and a response, there's a pause. And in that pause is when we choose differently. And that's how we create change. It's not exactly that. Again, you can le Google for l'exact, but you get the idea. After all this upheaval of the devil, the tower, the star is this moment where you're in a clearing and you can decide what you want your life to be about. You can access greater forces that flow through you that are bigger than just your identity or bigger than your circumstances. And that's where we enter into this sequence of sight, I call it. And that is the star, the moon, and the sun. The moon is where you're put back in that situation where you're tested, where you think, this again? I'm back here again? I thought I'd healed. Come on, universe. Really? Because the moon gives us an opportunity. Yeah, not a test, an opportunity, a choice point to see how much we've healed by giving us an event or a person or something similar to that, which, maybe started the wound or the pattern, to see how we'll respond so we can see how far we've come. Will we get pulled back in the undertow? Will we become unconscious again and not the best ways? What are the emotions and the feelings we still have to process around this root or this wound? And obviously, there's so much more to the moon, just like there's so much more to the star, but we see this non-duality come back again in this really positive way in the sun, which is the final sequence, the final archetype in the sequence of sight. The star, the moon, the sun, all ways of seeing differently, all ways to change your perspective, to change the place from which you see subconscious, unconscious, conscious, superconscious. When you get to the sun, you see the clearer picture, or as clear as it can be for where you are, as clear as you can get to up to that point. You see yourself through creator eyes, which to me are like the eyes of someone who really, really, really understands a situation, can penetrate a situation far beyond, just the first glance or the first pass. The star begins this process, though. Now, there's a couple of pointers or a couple of suggestions I wanted to leave you with vis-a-vis the star to help you during this time. Because again, the idea is these teacher cards help us with challenges we might have with strength. The first is really evident, I think, and that's to constellate or reconstellate. Draw an 8-pointed star or a 7-pointed star or 4-pointed or 5-pointed, whatever star you would prefer, you would like. And write your values and your dreams and your hopes, or really anything you are ready to constellate around and reorient around. Maybe this could also include anything that gets you through, like your pets, or the oak tree you look at from your window, a playlist, certain practices like meditation or journaling or cuddling with your kids or, whatever helps support you and makes you feel safe. And make that your focal point and your screensaver, and really try every day to embody yourself and feel safe when you're looking at that tree or cuddling with your kids or journaling or, whatever it is, right? And then also use some of those values you wrote down, like maybe joy or humor or something, and really try to both make decisions from that place and embody those values. If there's dreams, on the points of the star, if you have capacity, you can get started on that, what can you do a little bit every day, even if it's just remembering what those are over and over so it becomes normalized to you. I also suggest you locate where faith and hope reside for you and what is linked to those things, whether it's trust or certain practices or faith traditions or, whatever. I have it in my name. My mother literally gave me the middle name of Faith. Apparently I needed it that bad, right? The future will always be a place of faith and hope because it hasn't happened yet. And that's real. That's the truth. And there's been studies done around trauma healing and how it's very beneficial for folks to really clearly create a future self and a future self avatar and connect with them and begin investing in that future self and that future while feeling safe in the body. Creating that practice of faith and hope over and over again. You can ask yourself, if I had faith, if I had hope, what would I do? If I was more hopeful, what would that hope want me to do? Who is that person, that future self who's resolved issues, who's more healed, who's wiser, who sees more, who knows more? Who's that person 3 months from now, 3 years from now, who not only survived but thrived, through this with grace and love and with strength. The last thing I do want to bring in here, because it's a constellation, stars are part of a constellation, is relationships, community, friends, connecting through vulnerability and play and pleasure and imagination. We are not stars. We are constellations, right? We're made up of many different stars. Okay, my dears, I will see a lot of you at the workshop later this month. I can't wait. If you loved this kind of episode, if you love the deep dives, if you're like, oh, I'm really, really understanding more about archetypes and more how to utilize them and how rich and how much depth there is in the study and devotion of tarot and archetypes, sign up for the Patreon and take the workshop. If you liked this episode and you don't want to sign up for more, please send this episode to a star in your constellation who might enjoy it. I'm sending you so much love. Bye for now. Moonbeaming is a Moon Studio production. It is edited by the wonderful Amelia Ruby at Softer Sounds, and theme music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic. Hire them both for all your audio and podcast needs. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're always looking for aligned sponsors. So if you are a business or creative who'd like to sponsor an episode or two, reach out. If you love this podcast, please consider joining our membership to support it, sharing on social media, passing it along to friends, or leaving us a 5-star review. We'd appreciate it so much, and we appreciate you. Thanks for being here.